Okay, so something that came out of our discussions was the importance of creating a welcoming and safe environment. So we would like to do that for you today. So there's no obligation to mask in this space. Stimming is absolutely welcome. I'd say eye contact's not necessary. That's a bit hard, given that eye contact's a bit hard through screens. But yeah, please feel free to get up if you ever need to leave if you need to, turn your cameras on or off at any time. Some things that our group used to do in our workshops to stay concentrated. I used to like to doodle quite a lot. We have a few knitters in the group. Sometimes we just like to get up and stretch just because it's what we need to do at the time. But yeah, we're trying to create a specific environment within this project, which is one based on care and genuine respect for others and their experiences. So regarding that as well, so we're getting the knitting out already. I love that. Discussions that we'll have today are about people's personal experiences with their neurodivergence and also with their emotional responses to various issues regarding climate change and working and everything else. So we just want you to be aware that some of these things could be a bit challenging for yourself or for others. But we have got a couple of resources at the end regarding neurodivergent support and eco-hope. But yeah, we also want to say that within this project, we do only represent like a small range of neurodivergence. So we do acknowledge that we're only that we also aren't like a particularly diverse group in terms of other intersections of society as well. But this means we can only really give you our perspectives and our experiences, and that shouldn't be taken as the only view of the subjects that we're talking about today. We have some common issues and we have some that are more specific to our neurotypes and cultures. But yeah, I hope you enjoy what we're going to tell you today. And I'm going to hand over to Jen to introduce everything else.
Brilliant, lovely. Thank you ever so much, Lauren. And yeah, just a great big welcome from me as well. Thanks ever so much for choosing to spend your Wednesday morning with us. It's a real privilege to have you here, and lovely to see some familiar faces and names popping up, and some unfamiliar ones too. That's really lovely. So I just wanted to give a quick introduction about Nifty. So I'm Jen Dyer. I'm one of the two co-founders and co-directors of Nifty Sustainability, and you'll meet my Nifty partner in crime, Claire, shortly. We're a social enterprise, and really we support individuals, groups, organisations to create positive change in any way that might be meaningful to them, and all around sustainability. And we do this through research, through creation of experiential learning opportunities, and activism kind of underpins everything that we do. And really for us at Nifty, sustainability is kind of incredibly broad. It's basically anything that's making the world a better place. So when we saw this funding from the Co-Production Collective, we were really excited about it. It felt really relevant to us and really innovative. And so we just wanted to start by saying a huge thank you to the Co-Production Collective for the funding and for making this project possible. Throughout the whole time, they've been incredibly flexible. They've been really supportive. We've been able to get hold of them with any queries or issues. They've really given us the space for this project to evolve in the way that it has, which has just been amazing. And we've also had alongside these fantastic deepening practice sessions where we've had a chance to reflect as a team on what we're learning and what that means for co-production and the topics that we're looking at. And Rebecca, one of our co-production squad, who you'll hear more from later, has just written a blog, and she put it really beautifully. She said, "We need brave and willing organisations to make space for topics to be explored, especially through a co-production lens. Some funders may be reluctant, given that they don't really know what will come out as a result. So thank you to the Co-Production Collective for creating an environment for the unknown and trusting that the process of co-production will deliver." And so we're hoping really that this showcase, as we're calling it, is part of that kind of delivering on our project. So what are we up to this morning? So for the rest of this first hour, you're going to hear from lots of different members of our co-production squad about who we are and what we did, what we explored, and kind of the key things that came out of our discussion. At 11, we'll have a 10-minute break so that we can all get up and have a stretch and refill our cups. And then for the second half, we really want it to be a bit more interactive. And so it's kind of over to you. We'd love to hear your thoughts on what we're talking about. hear your experiences if you're happy to share, and how things work in your context. Be lovely to hear those. And then we've got a wrap up and close. And in a fairly amazing turn of events over the weekend, we heard that actually Chris Packham is going to join us for part of the part of the showcase. I think I might have already seen him in the waiting room. People are nodding. That's not a sentence I ever thought I'd hear myself say. So hopefully around 11:15, after I've talked for a bit, we'll hear from Chris about his experiences of neurodivergence and taking climate action as well. I was meant to have a picture of him on this slide, but it doesn't seem to be appearing. Another tech fail, number 2. Okay. So we thought it would be handy before we hear from everybody, just have a little bit of context about what this project's about. So how did it all start? In Nifty, we'd been kind of having more and more frequent conversations about neurodivergence and the interaction around sustainability, because a lot of the people that we work with and interact with identify as neurodivergent, and we'd been starting to explore it ourselves a bit as well. We'd also been having a lot of conversations about the emotional toll of working in and around sustainability. And we started to wonder whether there was a dynamic there around these emotions, what brings people into the sustainability area, and the impact that maybe working in that area has on them. And so it was fantastic when we got the funding, because it meant that we could explore that and see whether we were onto something. And I think safe to say we are. We've had enormous interest throughout this project at every stage, and this is really reflected in the numbers that we've got here today. So that's absolutely fantastic. And we're really excited to hopefully keep exploring this as an area. So we've got a core team of kind of 5 of us who are working through Nifty on this project, as well as on lots of other things. And we wanted to then recruit a further 5 people as a co-production group that we could then work with really closely to explore this topic. So the recruitment actually, honestly, was definitely the hardest part for me. We got some fantastic applications from really lovely people. We spoke to everybody who applied, which in one way was wonderful because we had some fantastic conversations, and in another way made it incredibly hard to then choose a small group, especially when we were speaking with people with really diverse experiences that we knew would be fantastic, and also people who had been excluded from other spaces before, and we really didn't want that to happen again. We briefly thought about really changing the format of the project completely and just working with a much larger group, but it wasn't really possible within the kind of the funding that we had available and what we'd set out to do. So I'm gradually recovering from that process. So then with our kind of group of 10, we've been exploring through fairly regular workshops these topics of neurodivergence, eco-hope, climate change, and how they kind of all interact. And something we've been using as a tool for that is an online whiteboard called a mural. We've had a kind of a love-hate relationship with our mural during the process, but we stuck with it. And I thought it would be interesting for you to see a kind of an example of the sorts of things we come out with in our discussions around with the mural. It was always lovely because we always ended up with some sort of fantastical, thriving ecosystem of diverse and wonderful entities at the end of it. So safe to say we also had quite a lot of fun while we were exploring these topics too. I want to just mention that this showcase is, we've talked about it being a celebration, and it's really positive, and we really want that to come across. And at the same time, something that we kept circling back to in all our discussions was the system and capitalism in particular, and how that actually forms a huge systemic barrier to neurodivergent folk feeling heard, feeling seen, and feeling valued. And our conversations really focused around the fact that the capitalist system doesn't work for us, doesn't work for nature, for climate change. And so while we really want to present something positive here, we want to also be a bit clear that that's running along in the background, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done around that too. So the last thing that I just wanted to touch on before we meet Chris is in one of our recent workshops, we looked at our hopes for the showcase, and I just thought this was actually a really nice sort of really gives a lovely essence of our group and what we wanted to get out of it. So I just wanted to briefly go through those. So we really want our passion and deep care for the environment and sustainability to shine through in the showcase. We really want to make other neurodivergent folk feel less alone. We want, for us, as members of the project team, to feel that we've had a chance to speak on issues that are important to us and share our thoughts. We really hope that people feel engaged and are curious about what we're bringing. We're hoping an opportunity for us as neurodivergent folk to self-advocate and to educate as experts by experience. We're hoping that we reach a real range of people, not just those who already have lots of knowledge on the subject, so that we've got lots of opportunities to have bigger impacts through sharing knowledge. We really hope that we're able to show that actually by making safer spaces and better practices for neurodivergent folk, it means everyone's better off. And finally, we really hope that it can act as a catalyst for focusing on this really interesting and important intersection between neurodivergence and sustainability, and inspire future work and study. So that's all from me. Thanks again for joining us. And I would like to hand over to Emma, and a huge big welcome to Chris.
Thank you so much, Jen. Oh, look, it's me. I haven't seen that slide. That's fun. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining on this hopefully sunny morning for you. Yeah, we've got a little bit of time with the incredible Chris Packham, who I'm sure doesn't need an introduction for a lot of you. However, Chris is a renowned naturalist, television presenter, writer, campaigner, and activist. And it was actually that last one where I was actually introduced to Chris through his support of direct action during my time at Just Stop Oil. His incredible work in the natural world has also come hand in hand with his prominent voice in the world of neurodivergence. He's openly shared his personal experiences, bringing much needed awareness and understanding to the challenges and strengths associated with being neurodivergent. His BBC documentary, Inside Our Autistic Minds, illustrated how autistic minds work, a documentary which not only inspired others, but helped destigmatize neurodiversity, making him an incredibly powerful advocate for inclusivity. So thank you so much for joining us, Chris. Literally not a better person to pop into this call. We just have a couple of questions for you, if that's okay. And obviously, if you want to say anything else, you're very welcome to. But just a first thing is, what do you think are some of the strengths and challenges for neurodivergent people in tackling the incredibly complex climate and nature crises?
Well, firstly, thank you for the offer to join you this morning. Very kind. And also thank you for your very kind words about my brief CV there. Strengths. Well, I think the first thing to do is to focus on our strengths and not be distracted by too many of our challenges. I think that if we address the challenges first, some of those challenges are that we can hyper-focus on things, and sometimes that will mean that we exclude other people's visions of solving the same problem. We can sometimes be quite didactic, and therefore we can presume that our method is the most effective, if not the only method of working. And that's something that we really need to combat, because despite the fact that we hyper-focus, and there's a real strength in that, it allows us to see, I think, sometimes with greater clarity, any potential problems, and therefore with that clarity comes a means of understanding perhaps their solutions. We have to accept that we don't all have all of the most brilliant ideas, and that sharing those and allowing those to evolve in an ecosystem where other people are contributing even if they are doing so peripherally, is incredibly important. So cooperation, something which we all, well, I certainly sometimes find difficult. My ideal existence would be a benign dictatorship. To the best of my knowledge, they've never existed. So from that point of view, I think that understanding that we need to work in teams is incredibly important, and that can be, as I say, can be challenging. However, let's then switch to the strengths. I think that clarity is something that we have. Sometimes our vision and available to perceive issues, problems, situations is that we can exclude peripheral detail. We are able to focus on the bigger issue stuff. And one of the attributes that we have is that we are able to speak about that with clarity. It comes almost directly from our minds in the way that we envisage it, and it's unencumbered by the sort of conventions of, I don't know, normal communication. And I think that that's a real strength when it comes to protest and devising protests and communicating our messages, because we're not interested in the detail, we're interested in, the result. And I think that that's where sometimes our neurodivergence works. I think sometimes where we can be frustrated when we're working with others is, again, due to the fact that they don't have that often clarity of vision. They harbor some risk aversity when it comes to speaking up and speaking out about issues. They do want to, to see barriers, basically. And I often say, there's that dreadful expression that, that we can think outside the box. Well, very often for me, there are no boxes. There is no ceiling. I only see a clear route to a solution. And I don't meet those barriers that I think that many of my colleagues meet or will put in the way. And that can be useful. I think it can also be for other people. We have to expect that can be quite challenging. We're forthright in our speaking, we're forthright in our demands, and we're forthright in our actions. And that can be, again, for other people, it can be difficult. For us, but let's be for them. But let's be really clear. That's a very much a strength for us. So I think that that ability to focus on things, analyze them critically, see the detail, is something that we need to moderate by allowing other people's views to come in, but retain our key strengths, which is the ability to see and speak clearly.
Thank you so much. That was super, super interesting. And I'm sure a Chris Packham dictatorship is something a lot of people could get behind. But no, that's super interesting. Thank you so much. I think that's maybe really shone through as well in your support of a lot of the direct action campaigns. That's especially where you kind of came onto my radar, I can't lie, was through your just strong, simple messages. Yeah, it's amazing. And my second question is, obviously, the climate crisis and everything that we see in the news on our phones on a daily basis is incredibly terrifying. And especially for someone who's neurodivergent, speaking personally, it's incredibly overwhelming and all-encompassing. And it's very hard to kind of detach yourself from that, which I think is in many ways, to a certain extent, is a completely natural reaction to what we see. Is there anything in particular that is giving you a lot of what they call eco hope at the moment, or just generally hope for a better world or a transformed world?
Well, like many of you, I'm sure that you take your sources either directly from the science or from that's transcribed into sometimes more accessible media. So I listen to the science. I recently read an excellent book, which I would recommend, but it is terrifying, but I would nevertheless recommend it, by Peter Frankopan, who is an English historical academic. And he's written basically a book which just describes how climate, biotic and abiotic factors have impacted the development of human civilization. So the introduction, I think should be mandatory reading for every human on Earth. That's how good that is. And then if you look at the last 3 chapters, it's a bit of an opus. It's about 800 pages, and there's a lot of history in there. If you're not into history, it may not be for you. The last 3 chapters were about my lifetime. Many of you will be younger, so you can read that down. And in terms of number of chapters, and then there's the conclusion. And the conclusion, I cannot deny, is absolutely terrifying. And I read it, and then I critically analysed my response to it. How did it make me feel? How would it impact what I was doing? Because I think, many would make an argument that they would read that conclusion. And let's be clear, it's facts, it's well researched. This guy is brilliant. And you could look at it and think, well, pragmatically, that's it. It's beyond our hope. It's beyond recovery, or certain things are beyond hope and recovery. But I don't receive it and react to it in that way. And I think that one of the reasons for that is that I'm essentially a trained biologist. I'm interested in life, all life, not particularly focused on human life, although I have enormous admiration for the human species. Adaptable, intelligent, resourceful, creative, imaginative. We can do brilliant things. And I think that under pressure, we always do brilliant things. At the moment, sadly, for the planet and everything that's living on it, a lot of the people, and certainly some of the most pertinent people, are not under sufficient pressure to do those things. But I am confident that when everything really hits the fan, we as a species will react and instigate a recovery. The problem for us is that isn't coming urgently enough and broadly enough. And therefore, the world that we are moving into will be very different than the world that we inhabit today. That's just a fact. But that doesn't mean that it has to be, that's not, riven with doom. Change has always happened on the surface of this planet. Change has always happened for our species on the surface of this planet. So to have to go through a momentous change is probably part of our evolution. So I see that in a way which is not necessarily depressing, but it's something which is actually, in terms of the biological aspect of it, is something which is quite creative. It's interesting. It would be fascinating to be able to project ourselves so many years, centuries into the future, and to see what has actually been resolved. So that's one aspect of it. That's the pragmatic side of it, the scientist, if you like, looking at that. What about the human? How do I feel? That was closer to the question that you asked me. I'm a fighter. I'm just resolute. Frankly, I know it could potentially be a last stand, certainly in my lifetime. And you will know through your involvement with direct action yourself, it can feel like an isolated last stand situation. Being an undiagnosed autistic young person made me an outsider. I'm 63. I grew up in the 60s and 70s. There were difficulties that I faced then, which I sincerely hope young people are not facing to the same degree today. Nevertheless, I always feel an affinity with oppressed minority groups because I lived in one. I was an oppressed single minority. So it doesn't matter whether they're travelers, it doesn't matter whether they're activists, it doesn't matter whether those poor people in those small boats crossing the channel. I will feel an affinity to those people. And that means that, I will do everything within my power to support them. I'm very fortunate to have a voice, which is why you've asked me to speak to you this morning. I have an obligation, an absolutely irrefutable obligation to use that voice for what I see as good. So whether that's campaigning for a better understanding of neurodiversity or trying to urge people to do the right thing when it comes to addressing climate breakdown and biodiversity loss, I have no choice. It's an absolute obligation. And therefore, recognizing that I have no choice, then I must just fight as hard as I possibly can. There is no point in doing 20% of the job. And as many of you will know, as neurodiverse people, we don't do 20%. We only do 100 or nothing. So giving that 100% is what I'm going to do. Even, and I have to tell you this, and it sounds bloody minded and stubborn, but I think that's maybe another one of the traits that we can harbor. Even if I was standing on the top of that hill in a real last stand situation, and I knew that everything was lost, I'd carry on fighting. That's because it would be the right thing to do. And I think, again, that maybe that comes back to some of the traits that we harbor. We do see the world, or I certainly see the world, I can't speak for all of you, and you know that, but I see the world in a pretty black and white way. there is right and there is wrong, there is good as there are bad, and there are things we should be doing and things we shouldn't be doing, and there's not a lot of ground in between them, if anything at all. And again, I think it's that perception and that way of being able to separate those things, which perhaps instigates the clarity of vision and speech, which we manifest as neurodiverse people. So all of those things feed into something which I have to perceive as a strength. At the same time, as a 63-year-old, I am conscious of the available weaknesses there. And what I have to do by working with other people and doing everything I can to understand their working methods is try and optimize and maximize our chance of success.
Thank you so much. That's a really, really inspiring message for everyone. And yeah, genuinely, thank you so much for joining us.
You're most welcome.
Especially after I saw you were doing those award things, like the awards in Parliament.
Yeah, that's right. So there was an awards last night where we were giving awards to politicians who we have to remember are real people too. So they are politicians. We tend to turn them into caricatures and then either celebrate them or mock them. But they are still real people. And there were some people there last night, as well as being politicians, who were doing enormously good things for the environment and for life, for biodiversity. So it was a small. I'm not a great one for celebration. I feel it always nudges close to complacency and contentment, both which I fear. But nevertheless, it's good to be able to show some of the new intake of MPs that these people have and continue to do great things, and they should seek to emulate them. So that was the purpose from my point of view.
That's really lovely to hear. Thank you so much. Obviously, you're very welcome to stay for the rest of the call.
I might mute it, but I'd love to carry on listening. Thank you. Yes. And good with everything you're doing. It's brilliant.
Thank you so much, Chris. Also, I'll pass over to Jen and we'll do some little introductions. Thank you.
Brilliant. Absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much again, Chris, for joining us. That's wonderful. Lovely. So we'd like now to, if I can get my tech in order, meet the rest of the co-production squad. So I will share my screen again and get all our mug shots up. Slideshow. Lovely. Okay. So top left, I think my left, that's me. You've already met me, heard lots about me, so I won't talk much more, but we wanted to give a kind of a key takeaway from our time on the project. And I think mine is something around, and we'll hear more about this, but the intent to make a space safe and welcoming, I think is more important than getting the specifics right. I think that's probably my key takeaway. And I'm going to hand over to Kit.
My cat decided that was the minute to jump off the table onto a cardboard box and make a noise. So I apologise for that. Well, no, there's no point apologising for her. I'm Kit. My pronouns are they, them. I joined the project. Oh, well, I applied to join the project because I wanted to see how co-production worked and if it could be useful to me as an autistic person. Because as Chris just said, I struggle in groups, partly because of the way other people react to my autistic traits, and partly because I can be quite impatient with people who aren't getting on with things, and I can be a bit didactic, if I'm honest. So yeah, I wanted to see how that would work. What I've gotten out of it is that with structure and with a work frame in place, I can interact with groups, which is really good. It means that I'm not totally wrong in my head, and also that we have so many things that are in common. I'm not the only person with these problems, with this issue of being neurodivergent in a mixed neurotype space, and I found that really, it was just really good for my sense of well-being. I'm not alone, And I figure if we aren't alone, then there's people here who are also struggling with those same things, and that really makes it worthwhile. So yeah, that's me. Shall I pass on, Jen? Yeah, I'll pass on to Emma.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Emma. I guess I'll just do a very quick introduction. I hate to talk about myself. I kind of saw this opportunity at the end. It kind of came at a time when I was kind of coming out of doing a lot of very intense activism and feeling incredibly burnt out. And I saw this and I was like, oh, that actually like speaks to me. And just kind of like being in this group and like talking about the connections, like the intersections between this very strong need, like it feels like a moral necessity to be taking action on the climate, and kind of how that intersects with, you know, wanting to create a sustainable future in a way that's sustainable for ourselves. And yeah, I mean, I've kind of been involved in climate activism for about like 7-ish years. Kind of starting just on my own doing my own little thing to kind of national campaigning. But this whole experience and process has been incredibly grounding, I think, to kind of share experiences of how it all kind of just interweaves and intersects. So yeah, groovy. Jonathan is not here, so I pass on to Claire. Are we saying a few things about Jonathan?
Yeah, I have something to say about Jonathan. I have been nominated as the person to speak for Jonathan. Well, about Jonathan, because I can't speak for Jonathan. Jonathan was a member of our group, but he is on holiday at the moment, so he can't be here. And he has him pronouns. His degree that he's currently studying is in archaeology, and his research on neurodiversity and history gave us part of our title and description about the berry pickers, because apparently our neurodivergent ancestors were particularly good at gathering and had special skills that, you know, helped us survive. So yeah, that's Jonathan. He was a really good member of our group, and I'm sad he's not here today. So I'll pass on to Claire.
Thank you, Kit, and everybody else who's spoken before me. I'm also going to be really brief because I don't like talking about myself, or the other extreme, I'll talk about everything forever. So yeah, I'm Claire Bastin, the other co-founder, director of Nifty Sustainability. And I think what really interested me in this project, or when Jen first came forward with here's an opportunity to get some funding to explore some issues that we'd been so keen to have some time to think about. And so that's what this project has given us a chance to do, to just really think about that intersection between neurodivergence, climate, nature, the planet, people, society, all of those things that we really value and have spent most of our lives kind of working around and studying around. And how we use, maintain, try to nurture eco-hope to stop us from suffering from the overwhelm and going over the edge, which, you know, it always just feels there. You know, Chris, you talked about getting up a hill and that kind of fighting, that really resonates. And we just wanted to find ways to, I guess, try and think about those intersections, think about how that all connects, but also then try to pull something together that perhaps helps other people in this space. So yeah, that's me. Kind of couldn't help myself but be involved in this project. And I'm passing over to Becky.
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, hi, I'm Becky. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a research and project coordinator with Nifty Sustainability. I wanted to be involved because it's just such an interesting intersection of topics to me. I hope to find out more about myself and also loved ones who are neurodivergent, and I wanted to connect with others who have had similar experiences to me, which I have. It's been wonderful. I think my key takeaway is that to create a safe, welcoming environment where people can thrive and not just survive, you really need to see everyone as an individual. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to neurodivergence or just people in general. You need to put yourself out there, and be honest with yourself that you might not do everything perfectly, but earnestly trying and being willing to take criticism is the first step to getting it right. And I will pass on to the lovely Lauren.
Hello, I'm Lauren. And my pronouns are also she, her. So I wanted to get involved with this project because during my last year at uni, I was starting to understand ADHD more and thinking that I might have that. And during my dissertation about eco-anxiety and environmental students, I interviewed this one girl, and in her discussion about her eco-anxiety, she spoke about it, the interactions with her ADHD a lot. And I was relating to everything she said. And I just found that so interesting and I wanted to explore more. And that's kind of how I came to this interest and talking to Jen about it. And I'd really say that one of my key takeaways from this work has probably been that community built on genuine respect and care and mutual understanding, kind of like Becky was just saying about understanding individuals and stuff, is absolutely vital and probably key to tackling all the crises that we're facing. And I think the kind of work that we're doing is quite foundational and really related to that. So that's me. And I'll pass on to Ellie.
Thank you, Lauren. My name's Ellie. My pronouns are she, her. I'm autistic, I have ADHD and dyspraxia. I really wanted to be involved with this project because community and connection with the world around me has always been very important to me. And yet at the same time, because of my autism, has also been something that I've always found challenging, has sometimes led me to burnout. And so that push-pull between really valuing community and connection and yet finding it so difficult really sort of led me to want to be involved in something that focuses on people like me coming together on an issue that's so important to me. I think my key takeaway has been that it's been so validating to find a group of people who I relate to so well and connect with so well, who also feel strongly that challenging the system and challenging capitalism and being able to address the systemic issues and not have it be an individualistic kind of approach is so important, and that has to be part of our approach and how we're looking at the climate crisis moving forward. So I found that really encouraging, and yeah, it's been a great experience just finding community that works for me and encourages me to keep trying to do that. So I would like to pass on to Gudrun next.
Thanks, Ellie. Hi everyone, I'm Gudrun, and my flavour of neurodiversity is ADHD, and I wasn't diagnosed until I was in my 40s. So for other people who've been diagnosed as neurodiverse later in life, there's a lot of stuff to unpick and a lot of things to get your head around about, you know, who you are, that you're not just a crap adult, you have strengths and you have challenges, and they're different from neurotypical people. So it's harder to fit into that box. In my day job, I work on I would say that I am what's described as a tempered radical. So I work on the intersection of businesses and sustainability. So I find that actually being an experienced outsider is a good it's a good thing to take with you into that role, because you don't actually fit with the community that you work with, as in businesses, and you don't actually fit with the really sort of, you know, the hardcore activists are either. You are on this line, and one of the things that I'm learning to accept about myself is that it's okay to live on an edge, and actually we need more people to live on those edges where we are, you know, we're building bridges, we're encouraging the people that we want to change in a really proactive way. I resonated a lot with the stuff that Chris said about working in groups and that kind of having the vision and bringing other people along and co-creating how it comes to life is really hard. And I do get people hangovers if I spend too much time with too many people. But I am absolutely, passionate about a just transition, or if it ends up that way, a just collapse. But we need everybody to bring all of their strengths. And my key takeaway, I think probably there's two things for me from this program, is that we're all different, but we've got so many commonalities, both in terms of how we think, how we feel, what's important to us, and holding on to those areas where we come together, and really accepting and celebrating that we are so diverse is really important. And the other thing for me has been how easy really it has felt to build community with this group entirely online, which is, look, it's not easy. And I think there's credit to the guys who've been the facilitators of this, but actually you can build real community and real impact in doing online as well. So Rebecca.
Hi everyone, I'm Rebecca. I'm from Southampton, and she, her pronouns. I can struggle because I have autism, but also functional neurological disorder, and and that's what attracted me to this project. And I'll be honest, I'm really struggling now because my neighbour has started doing some strimming, so there's some background noise which I don't know if you can hear, but it's really, really triggering me. So I'll keep it really brief. I think that struggling has made it harder to sometimes engage in climate action and climate action spaces. So I was really interested in this project, and it's just been fantastic to work with other people in that sense of having an inclusive space, and where we can be really open and honest about how our different brains work, and we can speak our truth. So it's been brilliant. And then to learn to reflect on that and take that kind of practice back to our local communities, just been amazing. I think with the co-production processes, it feels like it's really fair in terms of how we all have dialogue together. So that's been a key takeaway for me. Thank you.
Amazing. So that's our group, and now we're going to dive a little bit into everything that we've discussed and our findings. So eco-hope is something that we often, we had big discussions about, kind of in the context of eco-anxiety, which can be like all the feelings and emotions that can come from thinking about climate change and all the other issues that relate to that. But we wanted to give more focus to eco-hope as a concept, as that's something that we would like to maintain. So what does eco-hope mean to us? So for us, in our discussions, it came out that we think this is imagining the future that you want and working towards that. And it's an understanding that you can make a difference and that every fraction of a degree saved matters. So leading on from that, taking positive action towards the future we want is a part of it, and feeling part of the change that we believe is possible. Finding joy within our work in these climate movements, in the climate movements that we're a part of, and feeling like we have a place and a sense of belonging within these movements. But it's really important to note that when we talk about eco-hope, we definitely do not mean pretending that there's nothing to be worried about, because we know there's plenty. And it has to be constructive, and it has to come with a deep understanding of the systemic causes of climate change and their associated injustices. But fundamentally, it's about making sure that we're still able to contribute to the solutions without becoming so overwhelmed and deflated by the issues at hand that we just want to give up. Because it's when the people who care lose hope that we're really in trouble. But right now, we know that there's a lot that we can be hopeful about if we just look for it. So moving on to more of the challenges that can come with this. So we also spoke about how eco-hope and eco-anxiety and feelings that can come up in climate spaces interact specifically with our neurodivergence, and then more generally about the challenges that we've tended to face in climate spaces as neurodivergent people. So things that came up quite a lot was our very intense feelings. And a lot of these things actually Chris and Emma spoke about before as well, which was quite validating. So very intense feelings, very deep senses of empathy and passion, which we often spoke about can be our motivators. But also we can get quite overwhelming feelings and persistent feelings of sadness and guilt. They're almost feeling heartsick, especially when it comes to injustice. And feeling a really strong sense of injustice was something that we all spoke about and is very closely linked to work within the climate space. We also spoke about we have these cycles of burnout and recovery. And with our passion and our persistence, we just want to work against these injustices constantly, but that can come with a lot of self-sacrifice sometimes. So there's a need to pace out activities to manage this and avoid burnout and to keep maintaining our hope and just our stamina to work in these spaces. Everything can feel urgent, and I know particularly when it comes to ADHD, prioritizing and organizing is not often my forte, and that can be really difficult to work with. And then we feel the need sometimes to talk about issues often and at length. And this isn't always well received, especially if the things you're talking about are disruptive and they're being you're talking about these with people who maybe aren't in the climate spaces, and that can create conflict at times. I know that's also being spoken about in the chat already. And some climate events and spaces themselves are quite inaccessible. They're often very loud, they can be very bright, there can be just a lot going on at once, and that is not always conducive to a productive environment for some neurodivergent people. And it was really nice for us to have these conversations and see what challenges we have, but also just discuss our strengths. So I'll move on to the next people to talk about that.
So Becky and I want to just talk a little bit about the strengths that neurodivergent minds can have in the climate crisis and climate activism spaces. So in terms of understanding and compassion, there's definitely a common misconception that autistic and other neurodivergent people don't feel compassion or empathy. However, from our life experiences and certainly from our discussions as a group, we've found that this isn't the case as a rule. And in fact, it's emerged as one of our biggest strengths and can definitely lead to a desire to have a greater understanding of the world around us and a great motivator to take all sorts of action.
And as it's been mentioned before, our big feelings, but they can often be dismissed as us being emotional. But these strong feelings, along with our enormous sense of justice, motivate us to make the changes that we want to see in the world.
And in terms of different ways of thinking, I want to bring up something that Jonathan, who sadly isn't in the showcase today, wrote in a really interesting piece of writing. So I'll share a section of that now. He wrote that forms of neurodivergence may also have played a key role in the development of mankind. A recent psychological study by the Royal Society tested people with ADHD in a berry-picking game and found that they performed better than neurotypicals. Given that the genetic mutations of ADHD are more commonly found in nomadic cultures, it is possible that ADHD may have arisen as an environmental adaptation to improve the foraging capabilities of hunter-gatherers. That's just one section of that piece of writing that Jonathan did that's really interesting. And I think we'll be able to either send that out after the showcase today or make it available in some other form if anyone wants to have a read. But also what we can mean by different ways of thinking can include, for example, seeing the bigger picture, systems thinking, seeing how things fit together and affect each other. And that obviously can lead to some quite useful skills and approaches.
And that leads us nicely on to seeing patterns and linkages. And we've found that we often see patterns that others might miss, which means that we can identify possible causes and solutions. And I didn't think that this would be something that I ever said, but that links really nicely to something that Chris Packham just said to us. So the ability to spot patterns links to a number of the skills that Jonathan brought into the conversation, such as foraging capabilities, strong memory skills in our early ancestors.
Another common thread that came up from our discussions was dedication and passion, a common experience shared by our cohort, as well as others in the recruitment process when we got to speak to everybody who applied, was a strong sense of dedication and passion, which we've seen has driven a lot of us to keep going, even in the face of adversity, both in terms of the climate crisis, our own neurodivergence and personal struggles and things like that, because of how important our values and beliefs tend to be to us as neurodivergent people.
So kind of thinking about connections now, another common misconception around neurodiversity, neurodivergence, is that we don't have a strong desire to connect to others. And while some of us may not fit within society's very limiting expectations of how people should engage socially, we've identified a clear desire to connect and share experiences and values, and found that we all felt happier and more supported when part of an accepting and meaningful community or collective.
Yeah, I definitely personally relate to that one a lot, that it's, yeah. And also linking back to something Chris brought up earlier, actually, was that many neurodivergent people do tend to think outside the box, or indeed not perceive there to be a box, which can lead to creative approaches to problem solving, but as well as a desire perhaps to connect to the world and express feelings and ideas in different ways, maybe through arts, culture, and other expressive ways like that. And it may just be about different ways of expressing things, and that often is quite creative.
And some of the types of neurodivergence are perceived solely as being unable to focus or being inattentive, but there is another side which is rarely represented, and that's the ability to hyperfocus. So hyperfocusing means that we are able to deep dive into subjects of interest and get loads done in one go, as long as it's directed at the thing we want it to be directed towards.
So altogether, some of these examples and other things as well can come together and lead to us taking action, getting things done, being proactive, being driven. And that's why we feel it's so important and beneficial all round, to make spaces accessible and adaptable, to allow different minds to work in their own ways and bring out their own strengths and potential.
Thanks for that bit. And I think what we've kind of been wanting to think about as well is, what does it mean? How do other people support neurodiverse people to get involved more? And I think it would be great to get other thoughts from the group as we go through this. How do we make things more inclusive? But through all of the strengths and the challenges that we face, we can see how we make us feel safe, create the opportunities for us to get up and stand around, let us knit or doodle or whatever without, feeling like we're being watched or picked out. As so many people have said, we are able to see the big picture, and we can have a really clear vision of the way things can be. We sometimes have problems in bringing that vision to life. So how can other people help us to do that? I think is a really important part of maximizing our strengths and helping us to navigate our challenges. And then we're often unconventional. So we have really diverse ways of approaching problems. But I find that I think out loud, and I think that's come across as well from other people. So it's really important to ask good questions of us and to create moments of silence and let us think within that setting. And that can be quite difficult to manage in a group setting. So as facilitators or organisers, those are really important things to think about to be inclusive.
I also think, sorry, Gudrun, you said
Yes.
for us to chip in, right?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, I was just thinking that actually making sometimes making meetings longer, so there's actually time for more processing, might be a really practical way to help people be involved.
It's a really good point, and that bit about breaks as well, you know, is a slightly longer overall meeting, but break it up. And then we know we've talked about being so passionate about wanting justice, so you know, for people and the planet, and we want to be able to let that passion shine. You know, work with us to challenge the status quo. We've talked about the systems that we're confined by, but enable us to do that. It's hard to be able to bring that strength of feeling out if you're worried that you're going to be kind of shut down or looked at, or you know, the weirdo in the room, which is often the feeling that you get in these scenarios. And then amplify our voices. You know, we can add lots of value. We can, but we need that help to clarify it, I think. And then help us share that with the world, and to do it in a way that makes us feel like we are contributing positively, and so we can really, you know, get to the know of what we need to do. And then this whole dynamic between working together and on our own, you know, we want to be part of groups, but often we find it difficult, and we need that opportunity sometimes to go away, think things through, bring them back, and creating those different ways to participate. You know, as we said, the mural board was great because we could all put our stuff in there, and to set up those offline systems as well. So those were some of our ideas. Kit, was there anything you wanted to just add to some of those things up?
I don't think so. I think having different ways of doing things is kind of key. So allowing people to work to their strengths, and I think that means having a broader idea of what a good workplace or what good working space or good activist group can look like. And I think there needs to be some adaptation and fluidity in these spaces, while also being very focused on getting the work done. So having people do have different tasks that they can do, but all working towards the same goal would be really cool. I mean, that's what we've been doing. That's what we've been doing in the co-production group. We've been trying to work with our strengths towards this goal of coming together to do this and to do other things. So yeah, we've just been really valuing other people's ways of working, I think, and seeing the value in that, because it can be that it might take some people a little bit longer. It might be that some people need to wander off and do something else for a few days and then come back to the project so they can give their brain space to work, you know. And I think that comes out with really valuable results, and I don't think that people can always see the results because they don't like the way we get there. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on it.
Yeah, it's really critical, and one of the final thing that occurs to me from what you've said is sometimes in a group where there's mixed people, you know, neurodiverse I find I'm all or nothing. So I'm either got lots to say and it's difficult to shut me up, or I'm going internally. And sometimes you need to challenge me about going on too much, or being too, you know, passionate or for the situation. But like, I think that the plea there is to be kind and be constructive, and not sort of shame people in public.
Or at all.
Because shame spirals, as we know, are easy to get into if you have if you're neurodiverse. So I think, I don't know if I'm handing back to Jen or if we're going to go just straight into the break. Jen, I'll let you come back on and guide us.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thanks to all of you for those really lovely summing up of our discussions. So let's have a break now. We're just 5 minutes over. But if we have 10 minutes and if we come back at 1:15, and then we're going to open it up to more of a kind of a discussion type format in the second half. So thanks for all your incredible contributions in the chat so far. We'll be picking up on some of those and hopefully some more questions as well. So feel free to have a bit of a think about questions in the break if you get a chance. All right, so feel free to turn your cameras off, and we'll be back at 1:15.